This is about the media frenzy that began on December 26th, 2002. By December 26th, 2002, the media had set up camp outside the Peterson home. By December 27th, the media had blocked off the whole street. According to Lacey's stepfather Ron, it was like nothing he had ever seen before. Brent Roker described it as the media being all around the Peterson home. Neighbour Amy Krigborn called it a media feeding frenzy. She noted that the entire block in front of the Peterson home was blocked off with media and satellite trucks, which continued for 5 months. The reporters would sometimes stay past midnight and then come back at 4 or 5 in the morning. Miss Crickbaum recalled that when Scott would come and go from the house, the media would take pictures of him, videotape him, and shout questions at him. At one point, the media used a bullhorn and screamed, "You murdered your wife, you murdered your child." Random people would drive by the home shouting "murderer." Neighbours were scared for their own safety, but instead of the media attention dying down, Miss Krigbaum testified that it got worse as time progressed. The next section talks about Scott's repeated cooperation with police. In the days following Lacey's disappearance, Scott spoke extensively with police. He spoke with Detective Douglas Mansfield, Detective Craig Grogan, Detective Alan Braccini, Detective John Bueller, Captain Christopher Boyer, Officer John Evers, and Officer Matthew Spurlock. He was repeatedly described as cooperative. Officer Spurlock described Scott as cooperative. Officer Evers also described Scott as cooperative. Officer Evers described Scott as very cooperative on another occasion. Detective Braccini testified that Scott agreed to sit down with him and go over what they had talked about over the last few hours. Detective Mansfield described Scott as very cooperative. With respect to the morning of December 24th, 2002, Scott told detectives that, as was her usual routine, Lacey got up around 7 a.m. to watch the Today Show. When Scott got up about an hour later, Lacey was mopping the floor. They then watched part of the Martha Stewart show, and Scott recalled that the episode included something on meringues. Scott said he left for a fishing trip to the Berkeley Marina at around 9:30 in the morning. He had purchased a rod and reel and a 2-day fishing license at Big Five. Lacey planned to walk the dog and then go grocery shopping. Scott explained that Lacey's usual dog walking route was to go to the East Laloma Park near their house, head towards the tennis courts, and then back to the house. The walk was a mile loop, which took her about 45 minutes. Scott often walked this loop with Lacey and Mackenzie. When he left the house, Lacey was wearing black maternity pants, a white t-shirt, and white tennis shoes. Scott then drove to his warehouse to pick up the 14-foot aluminium boat that he had purchased 2 weeks before. At the warehouse, he checked his email, cleaned up the office, put together a woodworking tool, and unloaded tools from the green toolbox in the back of his pickup truck. He thought he was at the office for about an hour. Scott then drove to the Berkeley Marina. He spent about an hour in the water, where he headed north towards an island which was later identified as Brooks Island. He wanted to make sure that the boat was working properly. Scott said that he did not have a map of the area, but he had researched fishing in the bay on the internet. Scott pulled the boat back onto the trailer about 2:15 p.m. and headed back to Modesto. He planned to meet Lacey at home around 4 p.m. Scott tried to call Lacey on the way home but got no answer. When Scott returned to Modesto, he dropped the boat off at the warehouse and arrived home around 4:30 p.m. Scott noticed that their dog Mackenzie was outside with its leash on and the doors to the back patio were unlocked. Lacey was not home, but her car was in the driveway. Scott ate a couple of slices of pizza, drank some milk, and because his clothes were wet, he put them in the wash and took a shower. When Lacey still was not home, Scott called her mother Sharon to see if she was over at her house. Scott then called Lacey's sister Amy and some of Lacey's friends and went to several neighbours' homes looking for Lacey. Of course, the news that Scott had been at the Berkeley Marina on the day Lacey disappeared was widely publicised within 24 hours of Lacey going missing. As Scott's defence counsel would later point out, only the deaf and dumb didn't know where Mr. Peterson was that day. A great deal of forensic and circumstantial evidence supported Scott's statements to police. As noted, Scott told police he went to the Berkeley Marina and said he had researched fishing in the bay on the internet. Scott gave police a receipt from the Berkeley Marina stamped 12:54 p.m. on December 24, 2002. Police found a fishing report about sturgeon fishing in the bay. Scott said that after he left the house, he went to his warehouse where he logged onto the internet and then built a tool. In fact, a search of Scott's work computer located at the warehouse shows internet usage between 10:30 a.m. and 10:56 a.m., during which someone researched how to assemble the tool he had been talking about. Sharon Roker confirmed that on the evening of Lacey's disappearance, Scott told her that Lacey planned to go to the store and take the dog for a walk. Amy Roker recalled that Lacey walked frequently around the time of her disappearance, as Lacey was conscious about her weight and staying fit during pregnancy. Amy Roker explained to police that Lacey did yoga Mondays and walked daily or almost daily. Just a week before Lacey's disappearance, Lacey and Scott spent a weekend in Carmel, California, with Scott's parents, Lee and Jackie Peterson. Lee and Jackie both recalled that Lacey walked for several hours around town shopping and then walked down to the beach and back up a hill, which was 3/4 of a mile to their hotel. Lacey's friend Kristen Reed confirmed that while Lacey had stopped walking for a while due to dizziness, by the first part of December she was back walking again because she was concerned over how much weight she had gained. At this point in the investigation, Lacey's family and friends fully supported Scott. Lacey's mum Sharon thought the world of Scott. Sharon had never seen Scott violent with Lacey or even raise his voice. Amy Roker agreed that she had never seen them fight, nor has she ever seen Scott do anything that would even remotely be characterized as harming Lacey. Lacey's stepfather Ron told detectives that Lacey and Scott had never been separated during their marriage, spent 90% of their time together, and that Scott was supportive of Lacey. Ron recalled that even when Scott should have been mad at Lacey, he wasn't. Lacey's brother Brent described Scott and Lacey as follows. Great relationship, very positive, happy. You know, whatever Lacey asked for Scott did, she appreciated him and he appreciated her. Brent had never seen Scott get even remotely violent with Lacey. When Detective Grogan asked Brent whether he thought Scott could have hurt Lacey, Brent unequivocally answered no. Lacey and Scott's friends agreed. Lacey's childhood friend said Stacey Boyers thought the world of Scott. Scott and Lacey's friend Greg Reed considered Scott and Lacey to have a great relationship and had never heard a negative comment from either one of them about their relationship. Next part of the appellate case, the mistress. Amber Fry reports having an affair with Scott. On December 30th, 2002, Amber Fry called the Modesto police and reported that she was having an affair with Scott Peterson. Amber and Scott first talked via telephone sometime in November 2002 and had their first date on November 20th. They had a second date on December 2nd, 2002. Amber's young daughter, Ayana, accompanied them. Scott stayed the night at Amber's house and they saw each other the following evening as well. Scott told Amber that he had never been married and didn't have any children. They saw each other on December 9th next, and Scott admitted he had been married but lied and told her he had lost his wife. Scott had also told Sean Sibley, a woman he had met through work and who introduced him to Amber, that he had lost his soulmate. Scott and Amber next saw each other on December 11th, 2002 and attended a birthday party together. They last saw each other on December 14th. Amber told police this was the last time she had seen Scott. She had spoken with him by telephone since, including on the night of a candlelit vigil in honour of Lacey. During one of his earlier calls, Scott told her that he would be in Maine for Christmas and then in Europe for the New Year. After Amber contacted police, she taped all subsequent calls between herself and Scott. Police told Lacey's family about the affair. At the same time, police falsely told Lacey's family that Scott had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Lacey for $250,000. Despite its falsity, the life insurance policy was also widely reported in the media. After news of the affair and the recent life insurance policy came to light, Lacey's family and friends no longer supported Scott. The next part is the arrest of Scott Peterson, who was charged with murder. Several months later, on April 13th, 2003, the body of Connor Peterson was discovered on the shore of San Francisco Bay, nearly 1 mile northeast of Brooks Island, where Scott had been fishing on December 24th, 2002. The next day, the body of Lacey Peterson was found on the shore nearly 2 miles northeast of Brooks Island. Up until this point, Scott had never been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, nor had he ever been arrested. He had no prior criminal record of any kind. There was no history of domestic violence, nor was there any evidence at all that Scott had a violent nature. To the contrary, despite an extensive police investigation into his past, law enforcement could not find anyone who had ever had a physical fight with Scott. As noted, Scott and Lacey's friends and family had never heard him even raise his voice with Lacey, let alone do anything that would even remotely be characterized as harming her. There was no cause of death, there was no murder weapon, there was no confession. Nevertheless, on April 18th, 2003, Scott was arrested and charged with the capital murders of his wife and child. As noted earlier, the state's theory was that Scott killed Lacey in their home between the night of December 23rd and the morning of December 24th. Absent was any evidence on the cause of death, the state theorized that Scott suffocated Lacey. According to the state, Scott put the leash on Mackenzie and let him loose in the neighborhood so that it would appear that Lacey had been abducted while she walked the dog. Then Scott moved the body to his Modesto warehouse by putting it in a toolbox in the back of his truck. At the warehouse, Scott then attached homemade cement anchors to the body and placed it in the back of his 14-foot Sears Roebuck boat, which he then towed to the Berkeley Marina. Finally, when he got to the marina, he launched the boat, and once on the bay, he pushed the body with the anchors overboard. As for motive, the state's theory was that Scott committed the crime either for financial reasons or to obtain freedom from Lacey and Connor. The defense theory, of course, was that Scott had no motive at all to kill Lacey and did not do so. The defense says that regarding the affair, Scott told his sister Ann Bird that Lacey knew about his affair with Amber. This was consistent with the testimony of Lacey's mum Sharon Roker, that Lacey knew of a prior affair Scott had when they lived in San Luis Obispo. Scott later apologised to Lacey's mother and stepfather for not having come forward sooner about his affair with Amber. In regards to the bodies washing up, criminalist John Nelson found a piece of duct tape attached to Lacey's leg. Attached to the duct tape was a pubic hair. Another pubic hair was found loose on her body. Neither of these pubic hairs belonged to Scott. At the time of his arrest, Scott was staying in San Diego, where his family lived. When he was arrested on April 18, 2003, Scott was carrying his brother's driver's license, a credit card belonging to his sister Ann Bird, $14,932 in cash, and some camping equipment. His hair and goatee had been bleached. The state would later rely on this evidence to argue that Scott was about to flee the country. The defense says, though, that there was a far less nefarious explanation. Lee Peterson, Scott's father, testified that he and Scott were meeting to play golf that day. Scott was carrying his brother's driver's license that day so he could get a locals discount at the golf course. Police confirmed that, in fact, Lee Peterson had scheduled a tea time for 4 people that morning, and there was a locals discount. And Scott's mother, Jackie Peterson, explained that she had accidentally withdrawn $10,000 from Scott's account, which she was a joint account holder on, and when the error was discovered, she had given Scott the money to deposit back into the account. The remaining money was from the recent sale of Scott's truck to his brother. The defense says, as for fleeing the country, the fact of the matter is that Scott had already taken a work-related trip to Mexico in February 2003 when he was under suspicion for murder and returned to the United States. When he was contacted by police at the parking lot, he did not insist on Miranda rights, he did not refuse to speak with police, and he did not flee. Instead, his first question was, "Have they found my wife and son?"